Welcome to another episode of Come Together. All right, here we are, another episode of Come Together. Welcome. I am, as always, excited for this. This is becoming increasingly the highlights of my week, especially as I think I'm embracing that I'm going to probably have to stick with a guest episode, solo episode, swap off, and at least for the time being. And I'm happy with that. I think I've just decided to embrace it and say, well, you know what, this is what you got to do for growth. This is what you got to do to develop my own skills as a conversationalist, as a journalist, as a podcaster. Even though I feel infinitely lame describing myself as a podcaster. I don't know. I'd rather say that this is just a form of journalism, and I really think that I kind of got into that last time that I did this. But yeah, I think I'm going to have to stick with, just accepting the fact that once, maybe twice a week, I'll be doing solo episodes about what's going on. I'm thinking to start putting in the show note captions, what the episode's about, so that you, the audience, can see what I'm talking about, as opposed to just having the description be a solo episode, because I think that I'm going to have to start making them a little bit more topical and relevant if I'm going to keep them up. I've got a lot of things I'm excited about, just in general, as always. I had a ton of fun earlier this week with Guy Levy. I had a ton of fun with my Bobby, my wife's grandmother, who we really hit it off. And I don't know if anyone has, I don't remember if I told the story, even though I'm sure I have. But Bobby, who is just, her name is Janice Grohl, and she was the first person in my education series, podcast or series. And actually, her husband was my first teacher. My husband her husband had since passed away. My son Shua is named after him, one of his Hebrew names, Shlomo, which is what he went by. Um, we named him after him. He was actually, I knew him before I knew my wife. He was my first college teacher when I came back from being in Israel for a year and a half actually, and I didn't know where I was going to go to school. I didn't have any confidence in my ability to thrive academically. I've talked about this before a bunch. But one of the ways that I was able to tell myself that, one of the ways that I was able to convince myself that I was actually intelligent and able to make it through school and making my way through life, is was through this class where I walk into college and I'm scared. I don't know what college is going to be like. I don't know what they expect of me. I don't know what the reports and the tests and everything are going to be like. And I walk in the first class, and is a guy with a beard, an older looking gentleman with a beard and a big yarmulke, a big kippah, signifying that he's Orthodox Jewish, or very likely Orthodox Jewish. But the second he opened his mouth, he had all the wisdom and all the vocabulary and all the rhetoric and all the expression of someone that's really, really seasoned and educated and worldly, um, and you could tell almost immediately when you're in the classroom that he's there to teach. He's not there to just kind of fit you into his mold or his bubble. And that was really, really, really special to experience. And immediately struck me that this man is here to actually teach me a way of thinking and expand my mind to new understandings, not just kind of teach a class and if you want to do well in my test, you better do things my way. Very much not like that. And that was, and then and from that class, I was able to get the confidence that I was able to handle college and handle life really, and that I did have what it takes, and I could follow these conversations, and I could do it. I could participate in some kind of academic setting and not be a complete failure. So that was really special, and I have a lifetime of gratitude to him for that. I have a lot of thoughts about a lot of different things again. Um, and go back and check out that episode with my wife's grandmother if you haven't checked it out. Guy Levy was awesome, Israeli chiropractor, been living in America since he was 12, bodybuilder, MMA fighter, and then coach, nutritionist, chiropractor. Amazing life, amazing story, a lot of fun. And so I came across a book. One of the ways that I find good books now is when I listen to podcasts. If the host of the podcast has a guest on, and that guest sounds like they know what they're doing, what they're talking about, like they're speaking my language, that they have that kind of mindset and perspective and attitude that it is that I'm looking to add to myself and to grow with. Um, I go ahead and I see what they write and what they're interested in, or if there's a podcaster that I like and respect. Excuse that pause. I'm just sipping a light, actually a heavy stout, but lightly sipping a heavy stout um, while I record this. Um, but and if the podcaster themselves is someone that I'm fascinated by, and they make recommendations, then I certainly read them. And I think Mike Benz, who has been really making he's been on the whole podcast circuit since USAID and Doge and Elon Musk and the government the Department of Government Efficiency has been kind of making headlines and splashes in the news cycle. He has since been making his way through the podcast circuit, talking to pretty much everyone, a lot of the really big names out there, to explain what exactly has been going on in terms of U.S. aid, in terms of government spending. He's able to pull up receipts for everything because these are all public transactions. And he was really awesome. And one of the really interesting books that he recommended that immediately jumped out at me as something that I would love is a book called Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon. Laurel Canyon, and Laurel Canyon, for anyone that doesn't know, was a place near California, near Los Angeles, that was like a haven for uh, I I guess you could call it the rock era. I would say almost like protest rock, hippie rock. James Taylor, Jackson Brown, the Byrds, Crosby, Stills and Nash, Buffalo Springfield, Neil Young. Some of the greatest names in American music culture and history had their beginnings in Laurel Canyon. Joni Mitchell hung out there quite a bit. Joan Baez hung out there a little bit. I actually don't know. I didn't get up to that. At least I didn't get up to any mention yet in the book about Bob Dylan. Jimi Hendrix hung out there quite a bit. The Jim Morrison from the Doors, lived there until he died. Janis Joplin would hang out there a lot. It was just. I mean, it was the other music scene other than New York and in San Francisco, that that really defined the counterculture '60s movement, '60s '70s movement, and it really kind of died out towards the end of the '70s, early '80s. I would say that James Taylor is probably one of the, I guess, last greats or the most recent great from the Laurel Canyon world. But this book kind of goes into this author, David McGowan, who, even though I got his email address, it says that when I reached out to him to do a podcast, it said that the email wasn't valid. I have to find another means of communicating with him, because I would love to talk to him about this podcast in person and really get working. I should also email Tom Oneal, actually, from Chaos. But this book is really, really fun, and it's really, really interesting, and it's essentially a conspiracy theory book. Uh, and the reason why I am identifying it as a conspiracy theory book is because I I guess I've given a lot more credit to conspiracy theories, obviously, in the last couple of years than I've ever had before. They're fun. They've also proven themselves to be right, more often than not. And more often than not, it really just seems like conspiracy theory is just what you call something that is not what the official narrative is. And quite frankly, the official narrative has been broken for quite some time, and we're trying to really figure out how long has that official narrative been broken, and what exactly is what we thought it was. So much of history and so much of recent history, so much of American history, is not quite what we imagined that it was. And when certain foundational things start to shift, and certain ideas and prospects and backbones of our culture and backbones of our understanding of our history and our people and our government organizations and our entertainment and our culture, when all that is kind of thrown into question and there's a wrench thrown into the whole project, into the whole machine, into how the whole system works, you don't really ever know where to stop. And I would say that based on what I've read so far in this book, um, the author, Mr. Mick Goen, or Dave, has, I think that he has enough evidence to point out potential conspiracy theories, but just based on my own homework and my own research, I don't know that everything is quite as big of a conspiracy as he thinks. For example, one of the people that he mentioned that died in the whole Laurel Canyon scene, or that would hang around the Laurel Canyon scene, is someone named Pigpen. His name is Ron. I forgot his last name. He was actually one of the original founders of the Grateful Dead, and he was a blues player. He died at 27 years old. He was an organ player, harmonica player, singer. He had a ton of energy. If you listen to any of the Grateful Dead concerts before, I guess leading up to the year 1972, you could tell which songs were his. They were pretty much all the blues numbers, and a lot of the covers that they did were all based on his recommendations and selections. And at a certain point, he actually, and he was, Jerry Garcia would talk quite a bit about how he was actually the de facto leader of the band at that point. Well, how Pigpen was, rather, not how Jerry was. That even though everyone revolved around Jerry, Pigpen was the real showman. And Pigpen, you know, kind of tied the band's roots down to rhythm and blues, and opened up the band's eyes to black culture, blues and jazz, and black poetry and beat poetry and that whole world. And Pigpen had was he was never super psychedelic himself. He was an alcoholic, and he was a hardcore alcoholic. Um, and he would drink, a bottle or two of wine a day. He would drink a ton of, a ton of, really anything, hard alcohol, wine, whatever it is he could get his hands on. I think he preferred cheap wine, as what apparently was popular with black culture at the time in the '60s. Um, and and he, and Janis Joplin was known. Janis Joplin, who is known as one of the greatest female singer potentially of all time. She was a blues singer. She was a little overweight and terribly insecure, terribly bullied, and had a ton of demons herself. And she was a heroin addict. She was a heavy drinker, and as magnificent and talented she was equally haunted, which you find with a lot of people, and so one of in the first two chapters of this book, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, he mentions all the people that have died. First, he mentions a lot of the famous musicians, again, like Jim Morrison and Crosby, and David Crosby, and Graham Nash and Johnny Mitchell and Jimi Hendrix, and he mentions all these people, and then he actually mentions they all have, and this is weird, they all come from families that are involved in some kind of military or intelligence capacity, and while that is quote unquote weird, and while that kind of does provide the platform for conspiracy theories to really just bloom and blossom all over the place, I'm pretty sure that most of the men in the country in were involved, especially at that point. Were coming from World War II, or already in Vietnam. Probably not already Vietnam because they already have kids. So probably World War II veterans, and everyone participated in World War II. And so there was just a sheer, just the sheer number of people that were drafted to World War II. And then there was a tiny collection of great musicians that have come from those families, potentially in defiance of the war, like I said, maybe in defiance of what social and societal norms were, that you don't want to sit behind a desk 9 to 5, that the purpose of life is not just to get a job, but it might be something deeper, something more creative, might be something a little bit more real and something more tangible. It doesn't necessarily have to be so materialistic. It could very, very well be that that's just what those people were like, and yeah, I mean, I think almost like half the men in the country, if were half the men that were, half the men in the country were drafted or part of World War II in some capacity, either military intelligence, manufacturing, medical medicine, whatever, because that's really that was the zeitgeist at the time. And so I don't know that just because these guys come from military families necessarily means that the entire thing is a psyop. It is weird how much death has happened in the valley, and that's kind of what chapter 2 is about, which is he basically just runs through a list of people that have died in some kind of weird, bizarre way. And the truth is that you almost become the list is so long, and there's so many names and there's so many people that you actually become numb to it. And you're like, you almost instead of reading it and thinking terror and thinking, oh my God, I can't believe this happened, you almost think to yourself instead, um, yeah, yeah, yeah. Let's see okay, who else? Who else? Who's next? And like you kind of, they become numbers, not stories, and they become numbers, not people. And it's, and we become, and obviously it's a coping mechanism that our brains have. We can't possibly be plunged into depression every time we hear about something bad happening to someone, but um, there were an awful lot of people that died, and there was an awful lot of people whose families, parents, siblings themselves who were connected to the military, government, intelligence community in some form or the other. But and but one of the reasons, so the author mentions Pigpen among one of the suspicious deaths, and that's kind of where the best, and I'm not trying to call the author a liar. I don't think he's a liar. I think that he's interpreting events the way in his own way, and I'm going to interpret them in my own way. There's a lot more evidence to suspect that Pigpen died at 27 years old from just being an alcoholic, hanging out with potentially the unhealthiest group of human beings ever, which were the Grateful Dead, and um, having no money, not having any kind of hygiene, tripping acid very frequently, heavily drinking alcohol every day of your life for over a decade, like, and then he kind of associates Pigpen's death in conjunction to Janis Joplin and in relation to her, and and the problem is that how many other people that he's mentioning that have been killed like this are their story, their deaths and their stories are just tragedies but not intentional. The other thing that he mentions, for example, is that famously or infamously, but one of the people that was killed by Charlie Manson's hippies on Cielo Drive, with the main murders, which everyone probably knows about, but one of the most famous cult murder stories in American history is with Charlie Manson and this guy, and one of his right-hand men, his name was Tex. And they killed a guy named Jay Sebring. And Jay Sebring was a famous hairstylist, very successful, very expensive, hung around the Hollywood scene. I believe, if I recall correctly, he used to do some of the top people. He was a barber for some of the top people in the world, including Frank Sinatra and his whole crew. Um, And it turns out that in the same city, that Tex and Jay Sebring were both, Tex sold, I think, hair accessories in the from in this expensive part of town, and then would commute back to the canyon, and Jay Sebring lived in the canyon, and would commute to the different parts of town to do haircuts, and so they would occasionally, likely, have been on the same path. And Tex is one of the people that killed one of the hippies from Manton's family that killed Jay Sebring, and the other, and unfortunately the others. And and so the author kind of deduces by himself that they must have known each other, that this is no coincidence, that obviously, I mean, how many barbers are there in the canyon, and how many of them don't know each other, and can you believe it? And maybe, maybe, I don't know that I'm personally so convinced, because there's a lot. I live in a tiny neighborhood called Hollywood, Florida, and Hollywood itself has different micro communities within it, right? You got Hollywood proper, you have Emerald Hills, you have Dania Point, you have Hollywood Hills, which is separate than Emerald Hills. You have West Hollywood, which is where the Hard Rock is, that famous Hard Rock that looks like a guitar. And there's a whole lot of different Hollywood communities. Then you could go north to Fort Lauderdale, and Fort Lauderdale has their own communities. Or you could go a little south or west to Pembroke Pines or Davie or University or wherever. And and I don't know, just because, I mean, now you think back that this is the year 1969. We don't have Facebook groups, we don't have Instagram, we don't have TikTok. I mean, I don't necessarily know everyone that's doing everything that I do. I don't know every podcaster in the Hollywood area. I don't know everyone that's into beer in the Hollywood. I don't even know all the breweries in the Hollywood area. The new ones that open up that I haven't been to, or the new ones they're old ones that I never made my way to. They're in Pompano Beach. They're only 20 minutes away, but I never made my way there. So to say to say things like, yeah, he must have been associated, and like they must have known one another because they live near each other. Yeah, I mean, you know what? Like, it's definitely plausible. It's definitely possible. I don't know that I would bet my money on it, but I also know, and I think it is a fair statement to make, that the police did not necessarily do the best investigating, and I don't know what more they could have done. I don't know what resources they had. I don't, I mean, I think that we have very high expectations as a society for what law enforcement and what the people whose positions are to quote unquote babysit or watch over or protect us. It's hard to they're also just people, and they're also just regular humans, and they miss things and they make mistakes. And then there's kind of next thing that I wanted to, the next point, or the next connecting point that I wanted to develop this thought a little bit more. I was I was listening to an episode of Diary of a CEO, and I want to get in touch with the guy somehow. I'll do it eventually. Um, he gets amazing people on, but there's something about the podcast that just it does not stick with me. It does not quite speak to me the same way that the other podcasts do, and I'm trying to figure out why. Even though I have to give him like, I have enormous respect. I think his name's Stephen Bartlett. I have enormous respect for him. I have enormous respect for what he built up. I think he's extremely thoughtful. I think he's extremely out of the box. I think he is genuinely trying to learn, but there's just something about the presentation that to me does not always hit the mark. And it's not, but it's just, I think, more of a me thing than a him thing, because I think he's really incredible, and I mean, he's one of the few podcasts that people ask me, what do you recommend I listen to? I do recommend that one, and it really is, I think, incredible and worth people's time. And a lot, some of these ideas, we need to be reminded about that they're not such new creative ideas, but they're just consistent old ideas that are timeless and always true. And and just hearing different people talk about the same ideas but in different contexts, or the way that they found a way to manifest it. For example, discipline. Are you disciplined because you're afraid to fail? Are you disciplined because you're excited about something? Are you disciplined because you tend to have an obsessive personality? Are you disciplined because you have a family that's counting on you and you know that you have to pay your mortgage and and you have to put food on the table? And so like discipline is the answer, but what's the question? And so the value of a lot of these podcasts is that you could see how discipline is the answer to so many different questions in so many different contexts. And so he just did an episode of Mr. Beast, and as far as I can tell, um, Mr. Beast is absolutely someone to look up to. Period. Full stop. He is driven. He is insanely creative. He doesn't. He's a human being in the sense that he admits that he gets overwhelmed, that he gets, that the negative comments do have a pretty significant impact on himself and the way he thinks, and he does understand that life is hard and he's not looking for an easy life, he's looking for a fulfilling life, which is a beautiful notion in and of itself. And so Diary of a CEO, Steve Bartlett is talking to Mr. Beast, and one of the things that they're talking about is Mr. Beast's motivation for doing everything that he does, and why does he feel like why does he do this? What is he, what pushes him? What gets him up in the morning? What gets him to keep on doing this no matter what? And in the face of so much, blowback and negative responses, and Mr. Beast was talking about how he gets all these messages from people telling him to kill himself and how he's terrible and all these awful things, even though like objectively, like I think that if we take a step back with a lot of people, we find more, and this is actually kind of really indicative of our culture as a whole. We find little personality things to cling to as to why to dislike people, and we lose sight of the big picture in that, right? So I mean, the first person obviously that comes to mind for me would be like Elon Musk, right? Like, say what you will about the dude, say whether you like his Twitter presence or not, say whether or not you like the way that he carries himself, the way he speaks or not. Say, you could have your own conversations to whether or not he's autistic, but like take a step back from his personality and like your quote unquote complaints about that, and like look what the guy did, and like there is like if you're willing to say yeah so or so what to that, or like oh yeah well there's plenty of people like I don't know it doesn't feel fair to me, and there are plenty of people that could only do what they do because of the fact that they're haunted and because of the fact that they're kind of broken, and you definitely have that with a lot of greats. Everyone has what drives people to greatness a lot of times are demons, and I know that from my own experience, right? Some of my best writing, some of the times where I push myself the most and I get the most fruitful moments of my life, or the most impactful moments of my life, came as a consequence of dealing with a demon, or facing a demon, or being driven by a demon. And so Mr. Beast, I mean, what's he doing? He cares about the chocolate world, which is cute and fun and nice, and then finds out that like almost 50% of labor when it comes to chocolate is child labor, and so essentially slave labor, and most of these farmers get paid like $1 a day or something crazy like that. And you're like, and he's trying to do something about that, and he's trying to figure out how much it costs to pay everyone acceptable, healthy, normal wages, and and apparently it's not good enough. And like he has this, he's 26 years old. I'm 29. When I was 26, I had just gotten married. I was an asshole sitting at home, in my living room all day with my wife, working my work at home sales job, and he, just doing nothing. I mean, like, yeah, okay. So there are certain passion projects that I did, but he's 26 and he's running these companies and he's doing these YouTube videos and he has Amazon. He has Beast Games on Amazon, and he's producing this show, and he's doing so much, and he's just 26. He has so much time to accomplish more, to grow more, to figure himself out, and like we just jump down his throat. It feels preposterous, but one of the things that they were talking about on the podcast was what his motivation is, and what his motivation to do everything he does, and what's his motivation for the chocolate world, and what's his motivation for the YouTube channel. And and one of the things that he said, and I thought this was so eloquent, I thought this was so great and so spot on. And Mr. B said, listen, it's impossible to tell you what my one motivation is. And not only is it impossible, but it drives me crazy when people try to figure that out. He's like, if I asked you what your favorite thing about your favorite thing is, or sorry, what your motivation is behind your favorite thing. Why is your wife your wife? Why is your favorite sport your favorite sport? Why is your passion your passion? You'd probably tell me 1,000 different reasons, right? What do you love about your wife? I love my wife because she's pretty. This is exactly like verbatim his example, right? Like, I love my wife because she's pretty. That's not why I love her. That's not the motivation for loving her. It's a component. And then we have good chemistry, and we have the same values, and we have similar goals that we're trying to achieve in life. And I feel like we have some kind of mental or emotional um, connectivity, or forgot the word for it, chemistry, that that I just don't feel with other people. And you can list a bajillion. We like to travel together, and we like to, we like the same food, or we like similar music, or we both share each other. We both like to teach each other new things, and you have 100 different reasons. There's no one motivation why he does it. Like, it's so, and I think and he's right for saying it like this. It's like, it's dumb, quite frankly. It's stupid to just say, like, oh yeah, Mr. Beast does this for money. Yeah, money is one of the reasons why I do it. I mean, money's one of the reasons why, and money's primarily the main reason why most people do most things in their lives. Um, but that's not just it. It's not just about his money. And the people that tell him that obviously have an agenda. They want to break him. They want to break him down, or they don't like him for whatever reason, or they think they can do what he does better. And maybe they could, maybe they can't. I would be pretty surprised if anyone's willing to put on the line what he's put on the line to build what he built. But I mean, if you have an honest criticism and you're willing to do it yourself and do it better, then sure. But the reason why I'm talking about this is to go full circle with this book that I was reading, and with conspiracy theories in general, which is, been like a fun topic that a lot of people have been thinking a lot about recently. And that is that so many things in life, it's almost impossible to pin anything down to one reason. And there's a notion in Judaism when that the Hebrew expression is shivim panim laTorah, which means that there's 70 different faces or understandings for each verse or each concept or notion in the Torah, which is to say that there may not be one exact right thing. There might be there's seven there's several there's up to 70 hypothetical quote unquote right things to when it comes to understanding an idea. If you say that Abraham, what was how do you understand the story where he fought the kings in this first world war to save his brother-in-law? And you're like, well, what's the point of that story? Like, well, one point, which is very valid, is the value of family and what you're willing to do to go save your family. His brother-in-law was kidnapped, and he didn't really want to go to war, and he didn't really want to fight these 5 different kings, but his brother-in-law was captured, and what else are you going to do? And then you have the concept of well, and then if Abraham was supposed to represent the notion of kindness and charity and caring for other people, how could he engage in this war? And then philosophically, you say, well, maybe that just means that kindness, that to be kind does not necessarily mean to be a goody goody through and through. It means to have your values, and it means to stand up for them and to reinforce them and make sure that they're taken care of. And your family is one of those values, and and that's one of the priorities. And so maybe this is a lesson to teach you how kindness doesn't just mean to just let anyone do whatever they want all the time, but it just means to preserve your kin, right? Which is the root word of kindness, kin. You guys are similar in kin. You guys come from the same root, from the same source. So there's several different explanations that all go on at one time. and all of them are true. And this doesn't mean that everything is necessarily true, and this doesn't mean that one thing is necessarily exclusively true. It just means that life life is such a complicated ecosystem, and reality and the things that happen are so complicated that that to try to boil things down to one factor and one exclusive factor and just say everything is because of this is almost doing life and almost giving the beauty of the process of life, doing that a disservice. You're you're limiting the potential of what could be, what is, and how things happen. Just as I'm going to digress for a second. I was when I was younger. Being, I have my own relationship with theism and philosophy and spirituality and Judaism and God and all these notions. And I have a lot of thoughts that I've gone into and I will continue to go into, and I'm sure will be constantly developing or has been developed already. And one of the things that I believe very strongly, I don't believe that the evolution and science are antithetical or at odds with spirituality, belief, understanding of God, belief in God. And indeed, I mean, Judaism as a whole, historically, has always kind of embraced both the science and the God. And the way that Jonathan Sachs, who we said, who died a couple of years ago and was really, really the 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 face of Judaism to, I think, the world. He was really, really incredible. And one of the things that he said famously was that science was the how and God was the why, and religion was the why. And science would be like, how does this happen, and why does how does the world work, and how does X, Y, and Z happen? And then religion tells you, now that you have this information, what are you able to do with it? How do you understand it? How is this applicable to your life? Does this, therefore what? I understand that things, and we kind of live in that world. I hope it feels like we're kind of recovering or bouncing back, but like it feels like saying God, saying spirituality, saying that you're religious, was almost a negative thing, and culturally, it kind of set you up to be attacked. Like, oh, you believe in God, you're religious, what an idiot, and I don't think we're quite experiencing that as much anymore. I think the tide kind of is turning in recent years. But it really does explain, because I think one thing that we've needed as a world, as a society, as a country, as a culture, is we needed a little bit of why. We need a little bit of what's our purpose. Like we have all this advancement, and we have great wealth, we have great businesses and technology, and but we don't know what to do with it, and so we kind of end up stuck. Um, and I don't remember why I got to this point. Um, yes, I remember. And when I was younger, and I don't think a lot of people think this way about religion or science necessarily, or if they do, it's not always in the forefront of the way that they kind of associate it. And so, when I was younger, my brother, I was living at home, and my brother, who was probably at 7 or 8 at the time, asked me how water turns into ice. And my mom, I was sitting in the kitchen in my parents' house. I was living at home. I was single, and my brother asked me this question, and my mom responds, because God made it like that. It was like a miracle. Like, it's such a miracle that God is able to, like, is able to turn water into ice, and, like, it's a beautiful, amazing thing. And I said, well, because water has a cooling point where at a certain temperature, the body, the temperature cools the water down, that it changes the actual, I guess not texture, but changes what the component is. And rather than being a puddle, because it's warm and it's just melting around, it's so cold that it kind of gets stuck together and it becomes an ice cube. um, and that's why we have to put them in the freezer, and that's why if you put them in hot drinks, they melt. because as it warms up, it kind of falls apart again. And and we're talking about how that works. And I said to my mom, I was like, what you said and what I said weren't necessarily conflicting with one another, but you just cut several steps out of the process, right? Because you know it is a miracle. I mean, the order in the universe is what I think we consider to be miraculous. When we look at nature and we look at the harmony of nature and when we look at how everything is so interconnected and how whole ecosystems support, like, all work together in this beautiful dance to support one another, which is the world that we call life, and the life that we love and that surrounds us and that we're so in awe of and we're so impressed by, and like we can't help but feel that that life is just beautiful and we want to be a part of it. I was like that is what the miracle is. But part of appreciating the miracle is understanding the process that the miracle happens, right? In other words, you go to a concert, and I had this experience many times in my life, where if you go to a concert or you hear a song being played, and you're like, oh, that was amazing. And then you try to figure out, and then you realize what it actually took to make that song. And you realize how many different components went into it. And you have the saxophone, and you have the electric guitar, and you have the piano, and you have the drum section, and you have an accordion, or you have an organ in the background, and then you have a rhythm guitar and a bass. And you just see that everything in time together is making up this song. You can say, I love this song. This song is a beautiful piece of work, and the reason why it's beautiful is because of the components that come together that allow it to be so, and they're not necessarily conflicting with one another. Like, that is what makes a song beautiful. And you can also say that there was, that there was something tangible there that created this beautiful process, and that's why we're in awe of band members. That's why we're in awe of creatives. That's why we're in awe of public speakers that are able to put phenomenal ideas or complicated ideas into digestible terms and help the world around them understand it. And then, and then you can appreciate even more when you realize how much work went into what they were doing, that it complements. It doesn't take away. You don't say, oh, well, I thought the band was great, but now I see that the band is really only comprised of these people, so now it's not great anymore. No, that's what makes it great. I hope this example kind of makes sense. If not, then I'm going to apologize for that digression and continue with my last point, which is that there are so many different aspects to all these conspiracies, to everything that happens, that the answer is usually not what the mainstream narrative is, but the answer also is not usually worst case scenario, single-minded conspiracy, single strand in conspiracy theory. And when I say single strand, I mean there's one person pushing the levers and making, and being a grand master manipulator, that's just like this one evil person in a lair that's just secretly murdering people and getting away with it. Like, I have like that to me is as hard to believe as the notion that there's just one mainstream narrative and that's all there is to it. And that's kind of what the author of that first book made things seem like, weird scenes in the canyon. And I actually have far more, so far, appreciation for Tom Oneal's book, which is called Chaos, which was one of my favorite books I've read in a very, very long time. I inhaled it. And one of the fun things that I loved about it, that I truly enjoyed about it, was the fact that he never pretends to have any direct answers. He's like, listen, the Manson murders, the book's about uncovering the truth behind the Manson murders and who was potentially involved and all the different players that could have been involved, other than the typical standpoint of Vincent Bugliosi, I think is his name. Um, it's all different than what his one-track perspective was. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to find the name. I don't know if I threw out the book. I hope I didn't. Um, but it looks like I did. Oh, helter skelter. No, I didn't. Vincent Bugliosi. Yes. So Vincent Bugliosi says it's just one simple thing. And Tom Oneal says, well, it's not just one simple thing. We know that for sure. I just don't know how many different components there are. And he draws connections to the CIA, and he draws connections to a drug trade and a drug scene, which was happening in San Francisco and Laurel Canyon and throughout the West Coast and really throughout America at that point. Um, or he's drawing connections with some kind of obscure music industry, and all these and what Tom Oneal, who's the author of the book Chaos, does is he says, listen, I can't tell you what's going on. There's too many dead ends. There's too many people that are too old. There's too many sequences. There's too many different like loose strands and loose ends that I can't explain or justify. But he says, and I think this is the main point, we do know that it's more than what that was. And I actually think that that's probably the thing that's tying this whole episode together is that so many aspects of life, even though we kind of we're lazy, our minds are lazy. Our minds try to find the simplest, easiest solution. Do or don't. Yes or no. Did you mean to hurt my feelings or did you not mean to hurt my feelings? So that's a complicated question. I don't want to know, I don't want to hear about the gray area. I want to know, did you mean to hurt my feelings or did you not mean to hurt my feelings? Okay, I did not. Well, then why'd you say it? And you could say, well, it's complicated. I didn't really mean to hurt your feelings. I guess that what you said must have made me a little defensive, and I'm sorry for responding reflexively. I may have not been as thoughtful about it, but I certainly was not trying to be rude, and I'm really sorry about that. And, and the way that you phrased it reminded me of a way that I was being spoken to yesterday by someone that I really don't like. And so I'm really sorry, but my instincts, my brain kind of just took over. I wasn't trying to be rude, but I must have come across as rude. Everything in life has so many different factors to it, and there's so many different strands to it, and we do ourselves a disservice by trying to boil everything down to one. I think it's okay to say, I don't know what happened. Here are the potential factors. Here are the potential influences, and here are the potential list of reasons what we could do. Now, what do we do with this information now? Now, who do we keep an eye on? How do we proceed from here? How do we go ahead and make sure that this doesn't happen again? And we can really go out of our way to really have we could learn a lot more. We could become more well-rounded people, become more knowledgeable people, as long as we're able to kind of keep these perspectives, which is that life is almost never as simple as good guy, bad guy, and there's always so many different factors. And if we're really going to try to figure out truth and try to figure out, really why things happen and the way things happen and what the purposes are, I think that the way we're going to have to get there is by being open-minded and specifically not trying to find one particular root cause. That's how you get, in my opinion, at least, that's how you get bad conspiracy theories. That's how you get, that's how you miss big steps. That's how you avoid science. I mean, one of the big things that that I was talking to a couple of researchers recently because we're going to be doing some podcasts together. And one of the things we were talking about is it's so hard to figure out whether things are actually connected because there's so many outside factors. For example, research that's done in universities, like as much as research as you want as you do there, you have to be aware of the fact that universities, your likely majority of your students are going to be a certain age, coming from a certain background. Whoever's participating in the event is probably part of some kind of school, which means they have some kind of common interest or some kind of common background. And and so how thorough is your research actually? And that's something, and you're like, oh, well, I didn't even think about that, and so all these things in life, I think that we could really just benefit by keeping our minds open and looking for more than one cause, or more than one particular narrative, and keeping our minds open to the fact that there might be more out there. So with that, I'm going to say, um, so long for now, and I hope to have another episode this week. Hope tomorrow. I guess you guys will see yourselves. But thank you for listening as always and working hard to keep this podcast great for you all. Have a good day, everyone. Talk to you soon. Have a good week.